The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. Her hands were steady despite the cold mountain air that bit through her gear. She had been watching the valley below for 6 hours, waiting for any sign of enemy movement. The silence was deceptive in these mountains. It could mean safety or it could mean death was creeping closer. Maria was not supposed to be here. As a female sniper in the U.S. Army, she had fought for years to prove herself worthy of combat roles. The military had only recently opened these positions to women, and every day felt like a test. Every shot had to be perfect. Every decision had to be right. There was no room for error when you were breaking barriers and saving lives at the same time. Her radio crackled softly. "Viper 7, this is Mountain Base. We have a SEAL team moving through your sector. Be advised, they are approximately 2 clicks north of your position." Maria pressed the radio button. "Mountain Base, this is Viper 7. Copy that. We'll maintain overwatch." She knew about the SEAL team. They had been inserted 3 days ago on a high-priority mission to capture or eliminate a Taliban commander who had been responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces. The operation was supposed to be quick and clean: get in, complete the mission, get out. But Maria had learned that nothing in these mountains ever went according to plan. Through her scope, she spotted movement in the valley below. At first, it looked like shadows shifting among the rocks. Then, she saw them clearly: 6 figures in tactical gear moving carefully through the terrain. The SEAL team. Even from this distance, she could see they were moving with purpose, their formation tight and professional. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison led the team through the rocky terrain, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. Behind him, his 5 teammates moved like ghosts through the landscape. They had successfully completed their mission. The Taliban commander was dead. Now they just needed to reach the extraction point 3 miles away. Morrison had been a SEAL for 12 years. He had seen action in Iraq, Syria, and now Afghanistan. This was supposed to be one of his final missions before rotating home to his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. The thought of them kept him focused even when exhaustion threatened to cloud his judgment. "Contact front." The sharp whisper came from Petty Officer First Class Marcus Johnson, the team's point man. Morrison immediately signaled for the team to take cover behind a cluster of boulders. Through the gaps in the rocks, Morrison could see what had caught Johnson's attention. Taliban fighters were moving through the valley ahead of them, at least 20 men, possibly more. They were armed with AK-47s and RPGs, and they were clearly searching for something. Or someone. "They know we're here," whispered Petty Officer Second Class Tony Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist. "Someone must have found the body." Morrison weighed their options quickly. They could try to go around the enemy force, but that would add hours to their journey and take them into unfamiliar terrain. They could wait for the Taliban fighters to move on, but there was no guarantee they would leave anytime soon. Or they could try to punch through, but against those odds, it would likely be a suicide mission. "Mountain Base, this is Trident 6, Morrison spoke quietly into his radio. "We have enemy contact. Approximately 20 fighters between us and the extraction point. Requesting immediate air support." The response was not what he wanted to hear. "Trident 6, negative on air support. All assets are committed to operations further south. You are on your own." Morrison felt his stomach sink. They were alone in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no backup coming. He looked at his men: Johnson with his steady gaze, Rodriguez checking his radio equipment, Petty Officer Williams watching their 6, and the 2 newer team members, Petty Officers Davis and Martinez, trying to hide their nervousness. Maria heard the radio chatter through the communications network. The SEAL team was in trouble, and there was no help coming. She studied the tactical situation through her scope. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a natural choke point, a narrow passage between 2 ridges that the SEALs would have to cross to reach their extraction point. She could see the enemy fighters taking positions behind rocks and in small caves. They had set up what looked like an ambush. If the SEALs tried to move through that area, they would be walking into a killing field. Maria made a decision that would change everything. She switched her radio to the SEAL team's frequency. "Trident 6, this is Viper 7. I have overwatch on your position. I can see approximately 25 enemy fighters setting up an ambush in the pass ahead of you. Morrison was surprised to hear a female voice on the radio, but he was grateful for any help. Viper 7, this is Trident 6. What is your position? I am approximately 800 meters southwest of your current location, elevated position with clear line of sight to the ambush site. Morrison quickly calculated the angles and distances. If there was a sniper in that position, she might be able to provide covering fire. But, against 25 enemy fighters, even the best sniper could only do so much. Viper 7, we are currently pinned down and need to reach extraction point Alpha in approximately 2 hours. Can you provide support? Maria looked through her scope at the SEAL team's position. They were well hidden for the moment, but she could see Taliban fighters beginning to move around their flanks. Soon they would be surrounded. Trident 6, affirmative. I can provide precision fire support, but you will need to move quickly when I engage. The enemy will quickly figure out where the shots are coming from. Morrison felt a glimmer of hope. A good sniper could change the entire tactical situation. What do you need from us, Viper 7? Give me 2 minutes to acquire targets, then, be ready to move on my signal. I will try to create a corridor through the ambush site, but it will not last long. Maria began studying the enemy positions through her scope. She identified the most dangerous targets first, the fighters with RPGs who could devastate the SEAL team in the open. Then, she marked the machine gun positions that could pin them down. Finally, she noted the command element, the fighters who appeared to be giving orders and coordinating the ambush. Her finger found the trigger as she centered her crosshairs on the first target. The Taliban fighter was approximately 600 meters away, partially concealed behind a boulder but with enough of his torso exposed for a clean shot. Maria controlled her breathing, just as she had been taught in sniper school. Breathe in, breathe out halfway, hold, squeeze the trigger smoothly. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and, through her scope, she saw the first Taliban fighter drop. Before the echo of the shot had faded, she was already acquiring her second target. Another squeeze of the trigger, another enemy fighter down. The Taliban fighters were starting to realize they were under sniper fire, but they had not yet located her position. Trident 6, move now. Maria's voice crackled over the radio. Morrison did not hesitate. Let's go. Johnson, take point. Rodriguez, stay on the radio. Everyone else, watch your spacing and keep moving. The SEAL team burst from their cover and began moving rapidly through the rocky terrain toward the pass. Maria continued firing, each shot carefully aimed to create maximum confusion among the enemy forces. She could see Taliban fighters diving for cover, their carefully planned ambush falling apart. But Maria knew this advantage would not last long. She had already fired 8 rounds, and the enemy fighters were beginning to triangulate her position based on the muzzle flashes. Soon they would start returning fire, and her elevated position would become a death trap. Through her scope, she watched the SEAL team making good progress toward the pass. They were moving tactically, using cover effectively, but they were still exposed to enemy fire from multiple directions. Maria continued engaging targets, but she could see more Taliban fighters moving into the area. Viper 7, we are taking heavy fire from the eastern ridge. Morrison's voice was strained over the radio. Can you suppress those positions? Maria swung her rifle toward the eastern ridge and immediately saw the problem. A group of Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a rocky outcrop that gave them a clear field of fire on the pass below. They were pouring automatic weapons fire down on the SEALs, forcing them to take cover. She centered her crosshairs on the nearest muzzle flash and squeezed the trigger. The enemy fire from that position ceased immediately. She quickly engaged 2 more fighters before the survivors realized what was happening and moved to deeper cover. Eastern ridge suppressed, but not for long, Maria reported. You need to keep moving. The SEAL team continued their advance, but Maria could see they were running out of ammunition and energy. They had been moving for hours under combat conditions, and the stress was beginning to show. Worse, she could see more Taliban fighters approaching from the north, reinforcements that would soon overwhelm both her and the SEAL team. Trident 6, be advised, you have approximately 15 additional fighters approaching from the north. They will reach your position in approximately 10 minutes. Morrison absorbed this information quickly. They were almost through the pass, but 10 minutes might as well be an hour if they were facing fresh enemy fighters with automatic weapons and RPGs. Viper 7, can you engage the northern force? Maria studied the approaching fighters through her scope. They were still at extreme range, but she might be able to slow them down. I can try, but my position is becoming untenable. The enemy has almost pinpointed my location. As if to emphasize her point, bullets began striking the rocks around her position. The Taliban fighters had finally figured out where the sniper fire was coming from, and they were beginning to concentrate their fire on her location. Maria knew she had a choice to make. She could withdraw to a safer position and preserve her own life, or she could stay and continue providing covering fire for the SEAL team. If she left now, the SEALs would likely be overrun by the reinforcements. If she stayed, she would almost certainly be killed or captured. She thought about her family back home in Texas. Her mother, who had always worried about her dangerous job. Her younger brother, who looked up to her and was considering joining the military himself. Her father, who had served in Vietnam and understood the weight of the decisions she had to make. But she also thought about the 6 men below who were counting on her. 6 American servicemen with families of their own, who had successfully completed their mission and deserved the chance to come home alive. Trident 6, I am going to shift position and continue engagement. Keep moving toward the extraction point. Maria began packing her equipment quickly but carefully. She would have to move to a new position under enemy fire, which was one of the most dangerous things a sniper could do. But if she could find a new vantage point, she might be able to continue supporting the SEAL team's escape. As she prepared to move, she heard Morrison's voice on the radio, Viper 7, we do not have your name, but we want you to know that 6 families are going to see their sons and husbands again because of what you are doing today. Maria felt a surge of determination. This was why she had fought so hard to earn her place as a sniper. This was why she had endured all the doubt and skepticism. This moment, when her skills and courage could make the difference between life and death for her fellow warriors. She slung her rifle across her back and began moving down the rocky slope, bullets whining overhead. The Taliban fighters were getting closer to her position, and she could hear them shouting to each other in Pashto. Soon they would overrun her old position and begin searching for her. Maria found a new position about 200 meters down the slope, partially concealed by a large boulder and a stunted tree. It was not ideal, she was much closer to the enemy forces now, and her escape routes were limited. But it gave her a clear field of fire on both the pass where the SEALs were moving and the northern approach where the reinforcements were advancing. She set up her rifle quickly and acquired her first target among the reinforcements. These fighters were moving more cautiously now, aware that a sniper was operating in the area. But they were still exposed enough for precision shots. Maria's 13th shot of the day dropped the lead fighter in the reinforcement group. Her 14th and 15th shots forced the others to take cover behind rocks and trees, slowing their advance significantly. Through her scope, she could see the SEAL team had made it through the narrowest part of the pass and were now moving toward more open ground. They were still under sporadic fire, but the tactical situation had shifted in their favor. Trident 6, you are almost clear of the ambush zone, Maria reported. Continue moving toward the extraction point. But even as she spoke, Maria knew her own situation was becoming desperate. The Taliban fighters from the original ambush were closing in on her position from multiple directions. She could hear their voices getting closer, and she could see muzzle flashes as they fired at suspected sniper positions throughout the area. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they found her. 5 minutes to make sure the SEAL team reached safety. Maria could feel her heart pounding as she lined up her next shot. The Taliban fighters were systematically searching the mountainside for her position, moving in small groups and communicating with hand signals. They were getting smarter, learning from the casualties she had inflicted on their comrades. Through her rifle scope, she watched the SEAL team continue their movement toward the extraction point. They had made it past the worst of the ambush, but they were still in enemy territory with limited ammunition and no backup. Every minute counted now. Lieutenant Commander Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him as he led his team through the treacherous terrain. Behind him, his men were showing signs of fatigue and stress. They had been operating for 72 hours with minimal rest, and the firefight had drained their energy reserves. Petty Officer Martinez, the youngest member of the team, stumbled slightly as they climbed over a rocky outcrop. Morrison immediately signaled for a brief halt and moved back to check on him. "You good, Martinez?" Morrison asked quietly. "Yes, sir. Just caught my foot on a rock." Martinez tried to hide his exhaustion, but Morrison could see the strain in his eyes. Morrison placed a hand on the young sailor's shoulder. "We're almost there. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other." As they prepared to resume movement, Morrison's radio crackled with Maria's voice. "Trident 6, you have 2 enemy fighters moving to intercept your route approximately 300 meters ahead. They appear to be trying to cut off your path to the extraction point." Morrison raised his binoculars and scanned the terrain ahead. He could barely make out movement among the rocks, but he trusted the sniper's eyes. "Viper 7, can you engage those targets?" "Negative. They are using good cover and I do not have a clear shot from my current position. You will need to deal with them directly or find an alternate route." Morrison studied his map quickly. An alternate route would add at least an hour to their journey, and they were already cutting it close on their extraction timeline. The helicopter would not wait indefinitely in hostile airspace. "We'll handle it," Morrison decided. "Johnson, Williams, with me. Rodriguez, you and the others stay here and provide security." Morrison, Johnson, and Williams began moving carefully toward the enemy position. They used every piece of cover available, moving from rock to rock in short rushes. The terrain was treacherous, with loose stones that could easily give away their position. Maria watched the 3 SEALs begin their assault through her scope. She could also see the 2 Taliban fighters who were waiting for them, hidden behind a large boulder with a clear field of fire on the only practical approach route. It looked like an impossible situation. But then, Maria noticed something: the fighters had not a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face about 50 feet above their position. If one of the SEALs could reach that ledge, they could get above the enemy fighters and attack from an unexpected angle. She keyed her radio. "Trident 6 actual, this is Viper 7. Check your 12 o'clock high. There is a ledge approximately 50 feet above the enemy position. If you can reach it, you will have a clear shot down on their position." Morrison looked up and spotted the ledge. It was narrow and dangerous, but it might work. He signaled to Johnson, who was an experienced rock climber, and pointed up at the ledge. Johnson nodded and began looking for a way to climb up to it. While Johnson worked his way up the cliff face, Morrison and Williams positioned themselves to provide covering fire if needed. The 2 Taliban fighters were still hidden behind their boulder, probably wondering why the Americans had stopped advancing. Maria continued scanning the area for additional threats. She could see more enemy fighters moving through the valley below, but they seemed to be focused on searching for her rather than intercepting the SEAL team. That might change quickly if shooting started. Johnson reached the ledge after a careful 5-minute climb. The narrow strip of rock was barely 2 feet wide, but it gave him a perfect view down onto the Taliban fighters' position. He could see both men clearly. They were young, probably in their early 20s, with worn AK-47s and determination in their faces. Johnson did not hesitate. He had been in combat situations like this dozens of times before. 2 quick shots from his suppressed rifle dropped both enemy fighters before they knew what had happened. "Targets eliminated," Johnson reported over the radio. "Good work. Now get down from there before someone else spots you," Morrison replied. While Johnson climbed back down from the ledge, Maria found herself in increasingly desperate circumstances. The Taliban search teams were closing in on her position from 3 different directions. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they would have her surrounded completely. She made a difficult decision. Instead of trying to escape, she would use her remaining ammunition to buy the SEAL team as much time as possible. If she could eliminate enough of the enemy fighters, it might prevent them from organizing an effective pursuit of the SEALs. Maria began engaging targets rapidly, no longer worried about concealing her position. Her shots came in quick succession: 1 Taliban fighter searching through the rocks to her left, another moving up the slope to her right, a third trying to establish a firing position overlooking the valley. Each shot was precise and deadly. Maria had trained for years to shoot under pressure, and now all that training was paying off. But she knew she was essentially signing her own death warrant. Once she revealed her exact position, the remaining enemy fighters would concentrate all their fire on her location. Morrison heard the increased tempo of sniper fire and realized what was happening. "Viper 7, what is your situation?" "I am about to be overrun," Maria replied calmly. "Continue to extraction. I will keep them occupied as long as possible." Morrison felt a knot form in his stomach. He had lost men before in combat, but never like this, never someone who was sacrificing themselves specifically to save his team. "Viper 7,
Can you move to a new position? Negative. Too many enemy fighters between me and any viable escape route. Just get your men home safe.
Morrison wanted to help, but he knew there was nothing his team could do. They were too far away and too lightly armed to fight their way back to the sniper's position. The best way to honor her sacrifice was to reach the extraction point alive.
All Trident elements, double time to extraction, Morrison ordered. We are not going to let Viper 7's sacrifice be wasted.
The SEAL team began moving rapidly toward their pickup point, using every bit of energy they had left. Behind them, they could hear the sound of gunfire intensifying as Maria continued her desperate last stand. Maria had perhaps 20 rounds of ammunition left when she saw the first Taliban fighter reach a position where he could see her clearly. She put her crosshairs on his chest and squeezed the trigger, but even as he fell, she knew others would take his place within seconds. She shifted her aim to another target, then another. Her shots were still accurate, but the enemy fighters were learning to stay in cover and move more carefully. They knew they had the sniper trapped, and they were willing to be patient. Maria's radio crackled with voices, the SEAL team reporting their progress toward the extraction point. They were less than a mile away now, moving through terrain that offered better cover and concealment.
Soon they would be safe.
She thought about her decision to stay and fight rather than retreat. In sniper school, they had taught her that the primary mission was always to survive and continue fighting another day. But sometimes there were situations where that rule did not apply. Sometimes the greater good required a different kind of courage. A bullet struck the rock inches from her head, sending stone fragments into her face. Maria ignored the stinging pain and acquired her next target. She was down to 15 rounds now, and there were still at least a dozen enemy fighters moving toward her position. Through her scope, she saw one of the Taliban fighters speaking urgently into a radio. He was probably calling for reinforcements or reporting the sniper's position to other units. Maria put her crosshairs on him and fired. The radio went silent. Another fighter appeared from behind a tree about 100 meters away, moving in short rushes toward her position. Maria led him slightly and squeezed the trigger. He dropped immediately, but she could see others moving to replace him. The extraction helicopter would be arriving soon. Maria checked her watch. The SEAL team had approximately 15 minutes to reach the pickup point. If they could stay ahead of any pursuit for just 15 more minutes, they would be safe. Maria's radio crackled again. Viper 7, this is Trident 6. We are approximately 10 minutes from extraction. What is your status? I am still operational, Maria replied, though she knew her situation was hopeless. Continue to extraction. Do not worry about me. But Morrison was worrying about her. In his 12 years as a SEAL, he had served alongside many brave soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. But he had never encountered someone who was so calmly and deliberately sacrificing themselves for others. Viper 7, what is your name? Morrison asked over the radio. Maria hesitated for a moment. Military protocol discouraged using real names over unsecured radio channels. But, under the circumstances, it seemed like a small violation. Rodriguez. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, U.S. Army. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to know that what you are doing today will not be forgotten. When we get home, we are going to make sure everyone knows what happened here. Maria felt tears in her eyes, the whether from emotion or the stone dust, she was not sure. Just get home safe, Lieutenant Commander. That is all the thanks I need. She was down to 10 rounds now. The Taliban fighters were getting bolder, moving closer to her position in small groups. Soon they would be close enough to throw grenades or simply rush her position with automatic weapons. Maria decided to make her last rounds count. Instead of engaging individual fighters, she looked for high-value targets, leaders, fighters with heavy weapons, anyone who might be coordinating the enemy's actions. She spotted a fighter with what appeared to be an RPG moving between two rocks about 200 meters away. If he reached a good firing position, he could potentially threaten the helicopter extraction. Maria centered her crosshairs and squeezed the trigger. The fighter dropped, and the RPG rolled down the hillside. 8 rounds left. Another fighter was trying to establish a machine gun position that would give him a clear field of fire on the valley below. Maria engaged him before he could set up his weapon. 6 rounds left. The enemy fighters were now close enough that Maria could hear them calling to each other in Pashto. They were coordinating their final assault on her position.
She estimated she had perhaps 2 minutes before they would overrun her.
She keyed her radio one last time.
Trident 6, this is Viper 7. You need to move faster.
The enemy is about to take my position, and, once they do, they will be free to pursue you.
Morrison's voice came back immediately. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, we are moving as fast as we can. Is there anything we can do to help you?
Maria looked around her position. She was surrounded by rocks and had limited mobility. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, and the enemy was closing in from multiple directions. There was nothing the SEAL team could do to help her, and trying would only get them killed too.
Negative, Lieutenant Commander. Just remember to tell my family that I died doing my job.
Morrison felt his chest tighten. He had never met this woman, but, in the space of a few hours, she had become one of the most important people in his life. Because of her courage and skill, he and his men were going to survive this mission and return to their families.
What should we tell them about how you saved us? Morrison asked.
Maria smiled grimly as she chambered her next to last round.
Tell them I was a soldier. Tell them I did what soldiers do.
Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving into position for their final assault. They had learned to use cover effectively, but she could still see parts of their bodies as they maneuvered.
She made every shot count. 5 rounds, 4 rounds, 3 rounds.
Maria's radio crackled with the sound of helicopter rotors in the background. The extraction bird was arriving. The SEAL team was almost safe.
2 rounds left.
The first Taliban fighter appeared at the edge of her position, his AK-47 raised and ready to fire. Maria swung her rifle around and put her last sniper round through his chest. But she could hear others climbing up the rocks behind him. 1 round left in her sidearm. Maria drew her pistol and prepared for the final moments. She thought about her family, her friends, the life she was leaving behind. But, most of all, she thought about 6 American servicemen who would be going home to their families because of what she had done today. That thought made it all worthwhile. The sound of the extraction helicopter grew louder as Lieutenant Commander Morrison led his team through the final stretch of rocky terrain toward the pickup zone. His legs burned with fatigue, and every breath in the thin mountain air was an effort, but the knowledge that rescue was close gave him and his men the energy to keep moving. Behind them, the gunfire around Maria's position had intensified to a crescendo before suddenly falling silent.
Morrison tried not to think about what that silence meant.
Instead, he focused on getting his team to safety and honoring the sacrifice that had made their escape possible. Trident 6, this is Blackhawk 7-2, came the voice of the helicopter pilot over the radio.
I have you in sight. Mark your position with smoke.
Petty Officer Rodriguez pulled a smoke grenade from his gear and popped it, sending a column of bright orange smoke into the air.
The helicopter immediately altered course toward their position.
2 minutes to pick up, the pilot announced. Be advised, I am taking small arms fire from multiple positions.
This will be a hot extraction.
Morrison could see the Black Hawk helicopter approaching fast and, low, its door gunners already engaging Taliban positions in the surrounding hills. The pilot was flying aggressively, using the terrain to mask his approach and minimize exposure to enemy fire. As the helicopter flared for landing, Morrison's team formed a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. They were down to their last magazines of ammunition, but they were determined to hold the area until everyone was aboard. The helicopter touched down for only 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Morrison counted his men as they ran toward the aircraft: Johnson, Williams, Rodriguez, Martinez, Davis, all present and accounted for. As the last man dove through the helicopter door, Morrison followed, and immediately the aircraft lifted off and banked sharply away from the landing zone. As they gained altitude, Morrison looked back toward the mountain where Maria had made her stand. Smoke was rising from several locations, and he could see small figures moving among the rocks. The Taliban had taken her position, but at what cost? How many of their fighters had the lone sniper eliminated before being overrun?
Sir?
Petty Officer Martinez was looking at him with concern.
Are you all right?
Morrison realized he had been staring out the helicopter window for several minutes without speaking.
I'm fine, Martinez.
Just thinking about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. The young sailor's expression grew solemn.
She saved our lives, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Back at the mountain position, Taliban fighters were searching through the rocks where Maria had made her final stand. They found her rifle, damaged by gunfire, and scattered brass casings from her ammunition. But they did not find Maria herself. Unknown to either the SEALs or the Taliban, Maria had not died in the final assault. When she fired her last sniper round, she had immediately rolled away from her firing position and into a narrow crevice between two large boulders. The crevice was barely wide enough for a person, but it provided complete concealment from above. As Taliban fighters overran her position, Maria had pressed herself deeper into the rocky hiding place, her sidearm ready in case she was discovered. She could hear the enemy fighters calling to each other in excited voices as they searched for the sniper who had caused them so many casualties. Maria remained motionless for hours as the Taliban fighters continued their search. They were angry and frustrated, having lost many comrades to her precision fire. She knew that if they found her alive, her death would not be quick or merciful. As darkness began to fall over the mountains, the Taliban search teams finally gave up and withdrew to their base camps. Maria waited another 2 hours before slowly emerging from her hiding place, her muscles cramped from hours of remaining motionless in the narrow space. She assessed her situation carefully. She was alone in enemy territory with no radio contact, limited ammunition, and no extraction plan. Her rifle was gone, destroyed in the final firefight, leaving her with only her sidearm and survival gear. But Maria was alive, and as long as she was alive, she could find a way home. Meanwhile, at the coalition base, Morrison was completing his mission debriefing with the intelligence officers. He provided a detailed account of the operation, including the crucial assistance provided by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. "We need to confirm what happened to the sniper," said Major Collins, the intelligence chief. "If she was captured, we need to know immediately."
Morrison nodded grimly.
Taliban propaganda videos of captured American soldiers were a powerful weapon for the enemy, and the capture of a female sniper would be especially valuable to them. "We will monitor all enemy communications and propaganda channels," Collins continued.
"If she is alive and in enemy hands, we will find out quickly."
But hours passed with no word from Taliban sources about a captured American sniper. This could mean many things. She might have been killed outright, her body might not have been found, or she might have somehow escaped. Morrison found himself hoping for the latter possibility, despite knowing how unlikely it was for someone to survive alone in those mountains. Maria spent her first night of evasion moving carefully through the rocky terrain, using her training in survival and escape techniques. She traveled only at night, when the darkness provided concealment, and found hiding places during the day to rest and observe enemy movement patterns. Her goal was to reach a ridgeline approximately 15 miles to the east, where coalition forces maintained observation posts. It was a dangerous journey through enemy-controlled territory, but it was her best chance of reaching safety. On her second day of evasion, Maria encountered her first major obstacle. A Taliban patrol of 6 fighters was moving directly along her planned route of travel. She could either wait for them to pass, which might take hours, or find an alternate route through more difficult terrain. Maria chose to wait. From a concealed position among some boulders, she watched the enemy patrol move slowly through the valley below. They were searching carefully, probably looking for any sign of her passage. Their presence confirmed that the Taliban were still actively hunting for the American sniper. After the patrol passed, Maria continued her journey. She moved like a ghost through the mountains, using every piece of cover and following paths that would leave minimal tracks. Her years of training in advanced sniper techniques included extensive instruction in fieldcraft and camouflage, skills that were now keeping her alive. Back at the coalition base, Morrison was struggling with the knowledge that Maria was missing. He had written preliminary reports about her actions during the firefight, but he found it difficult to use past tense when describing her heroism. In his heart, he refused to believe she was dead. "Sir, you need to see this," Petty Officer Rodriguez approached Morrison with a concerned expression. "I have been monitoring Taliban radio chatter, and they are still actively searching for the sniper. If they had captured or killed her, they would be bragging about it on every frequency." Morrison felt a flicker of hope. Rodriguez was right, the Taliban were not shy about publicizing their successes against coalition forces. The fact that they were still searching suggested that Maria might still be alive and evading capture.
"Have we received any emergency signals or coded transmissions that might be from her?" Morrison asked.
"Negative, sir.
But she might not want to risk using any electronic devices that could give away her position. Morrison made a decision. "I want to speak with the commanding officer about organizing a search and rescue mission." Rodriguez looked surprised. "Sir, she was not part of our unit. I am not sure the command will authorize a SAR operation for one missing soldier." "She saved our lives," Morrison replied firmly. "6 SEALs are alive today because of her actions. I think that earns her our best effort to bring her home." Maria's third night of evasion brought her within sight of the coalition observation posts on the distant ridgeline. Through her small binoculars, she could see the defensive positions and communication antennas that marked friendly territory. But, between her current position and safety lay 5 miles of open ground that was heavily patrolled by enemy forces. She spent hours studying the patrol patterns, timing their movements, and looking for gaps in their coverage. The Taliban had established a network of checkpoints and roving patrols that made crossing the open area extremely dangerous. As dawn approached, Maria found a hiding place among some rocks and tried to rest. She had not slept more than a few hours in 3 days, and exhaustion was beginning to affect her judgment. But she knew that one mistake could cost her life or freedom. During the day, she observed increased Taliban activity in the valley. Trucks and motorcycles moved between the various checkpoints, and she could see fighters digging new defensive positions. They were clearly preparing for something, possibly a major operation against coalition forces. This intelligence was potentially valuable enough to justify the risks she was taking to reach friendly lines. The Taliban appeared to be massing forces for an attack, and coalition commanders needed to know about it. As her 4th night of evasion began, Maria prepared for the most dangerous part of her journey. She would have to cross 5 miles of enemy-controlled terrain in complete darkness, avoiding multiple patrol routes and checkpoint positions. She began moving at midnight, when Taliban activity typically reached its lowest point. She traveled in short rushes, moving from cover to cover and stopping frequently to listen for signs of enemy presence. Halfway across the valley, Maria encountered her closest call yet. A Taliban patrol appeared suddenly, from behind a small hill, walking directly toward her position. She had perhaps 10 seconds to find concealment before they would spot her. Maria dove behind a low stone wall that had probably been built by farmers decades earlier. The wall was barely 18 inches high, but it was the only cover available. She pressed herself flat against the ground and held her breath as the patrol passed within 20 feet of her position. One of the Taliban fighters stopped directly across from her hiding place and said something to his companions. Maria's heart pounded as she prepared to fight if necessary, but, after a moment, the fighter continued walking and the patrol moved on. After waiting another hour to ensure the patrol was gone, Maria resumed her movement toward the coalition lines. She was now less than 2 miles from safety, but she knew the final approach would be the most dangerous. Coalition forces would be watching for infiltrators, and they might shoot first and ask questions later if they spotted an unidentified figure approaching in darkness. Morrison had spent the past 3 days arguing with his superiors about organizing a search and rescue mission for Maria. The initial response was that such an operation was too risky and too expensive for one missing soldier who was not even part of their unit. But Morrison was persistent, and he had allies. The helicopter pilot who had extracted his team reported seeing sustained sniper fire that had clearly disrupted Taliban operations. Other intelligence reports confirmed that enemy forces had suffered significant casualties in the area where Maria had made her stand. She single-handedly changed the tactical situation and allowed 6 SEALs to escape, Morrison argued in yet another meeting with the base commander. "If we abandon her now, what does that say about how we treat our people?" Finally, Morrison received approval for a limited reconnaissance mission to the area where Maria had last been seen. It would not be a full-scale search and rescue operation, but it was better than nothing. As Maria approached the final mile to safety, she could see the lights of the coalition observation posts clearly. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and running on pure willpower, but she was almost home. She began the careful process of signaling her approach to avoid being shot by friendly forces. Using her small flashlight, she began transmitting the proper identification codes in Morse code, hoping that someone on the coalition lines would recognize the signals and realize she was an American soldier trying to reach safety. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Maria heard a voice calling out in English, "American soldier, this is Sergeant Murphy, U.S. Army. If you can hear me, stop where you are and identify yourself." Maria felt relief flood through her body. Sergeant Murphy, this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, U.S. Army. I am approaching your position from the west. I have been evading enemy forces for 4 days. There was a pause before Sergeant Murphy responded. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, are you the sniper who assisted in the SEAL extraction 4 days ago? Affirmative. Ma'am, you are going to be very happy to know that there are some people here who have been looking for you. Maria emerged from the darkness into the bright lights of the Coalition observation post, her legs shaking from exhaustion and relief. She had made it. After 4 days of evading enemy forces in hostile territory, she was finally safe among friendly forces. Sergeant Murphy, a young Army soldier with kind eyes, immediately radioed the base to report her arrival. Within minutes, a medical team was examining her for injuries while intelligence officers prepared to debrief her on what she had observed during her evasion. Ma'am, I need to tell you, Sergeant Murphy said as the medics checked her over, there has been a lot of activity looking for you. The SEAL team you helped has been pushing hard for a search and rescue mission. Maria was surprised. She had assumed that once the SEALs reached safety, they would move on to their next mission and forget about the sniper who had provided covering fire. The idea that they had been actively working to find her was both touching and unexpected. Are they all safe? Maria asked. This was the question that had been foremost in her mind during the long nights of evasion. Yes, ma'am. All 6 SEALs made it home without serious injuries. Lieutenant Commander Morrison has been here every day asking for updates on the search. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Morrison appeared at the observation post. He had been monitoring radio communications and had immediately responded when word came that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had reached friendly lines. Morrison looked at Maria with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and amazement. She was dirty, exhausted, and clearly had been through an ordeal, but she was alive. The woman who had sacrificed everything to save his team had somehow survived and made it back to safety. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion. It is good to see you. Maria attempted to stand at attention, but Morrison immediately waved her back down. None of that formal stuff right now. You have been through enough. Over the next hour, as Maria received medical attention and began her intelligence debriefing, Morrison stayed close by. He wanted to hear her story of survival and evasion, but, more importantly, he wanted to make sure she knew how much her actions had meant to him and his team. I need you to know, Morrison told her during a quiet moment, that what you did up on that mountain changed everything. Not just for my team, but for me personally. I have been in combat for 12 years, and I have never seen anything like the courage you displayed. Maria was uncomfortable with praise. She had done what she thought was necessary in the situation, nothing more. I was just doing my job, Lieutenant Commander. Any soldier would have done the same thing. Morrison shook his head firmly. No, they would not have. You had multiple opportunities to withdraw to safety, but you stayed and fought to give us time to escape. You risked everything for 6 people you had never met. As Maria underwent medical examination and debriefing, her story of survival began to emerge. She had evaded capture for 4 days, moving only at night and hiding during the day. She had observed significant Taliban troop movements and defensive preparations that provided valuable intelligence to coalition forces. More importantly, her actions during the firefight had eliminated nearly a dozen enemy fighters and disrupted what appeared to be a coordinated ambush. Intelligence analysis suggested that her intervention had not only saved the SEAL team but had also prevented the enemy from establishing a strong position that could have threatened future operations. 3 days later, at the main coalition base, Maria found herself in an uncomfortable position. She was being recommended for one of the Army's highest decorations for valor. Morrison and his team had provided detailed statements about her actions, and the intelligence community had confirmed the strategic impact of her intervention. I do not want any medals, Maria told the awards officer. I just want to get back to my unit and continue doing my job. But the process was already in motion. The story of the female sniper who had single-handedly saved a SEAL team was spreading through the military community and beyond. Maria was becoming a symbol of courage and capability that challenged traditional assumptions about women in combat roles. Morrison approached her after the awards ceremony briefing. I know you do not want the attention, but you need to understand something. Your story is going to inspire a lot of people, especially young women who are thinking about military careers. Maria sighed. I never wanted to be a symbol of anything. I just wanted to be a good soldier.
You are a good soldier, Morrison replied. You are one of the best soldiers I have ever served with, regardless of gender.
But, whether you want it or not, you have also become something more.
A week later, Maria was flown back to her home base for what was supposed to be a routine return to duty. Instead, she found herself facing a media circus that had learned about the rescue mission and her role in it. The story had somehow leaked to the press, and reporters were eager to interview the Angel sniper who had saved 6 Navy SEALs in Afghanistan.
Maria was horrified by the attention and the dramatic nickname the media had given her.
This is exactly what I was afraid of, she told her commanding officer, Colonel Williams.
I did not do this for fame or publicity. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Colonel Williams was sympathetic but realistic.
Staff Sergeant, like it or not, your story has captured the public imagination.
The Army is going to want you to do some interviews and public appearances. It is good publicity for the service and for women in combat roles. Maria reluctantly agreed to a limited number of interviews, but she insisted on keeping the focus on the broader issues of military service and teamwork rather than her individual actions. She wanted people to understand that her success was built on years of training and the support of countless instructors, fellow soldiers, and commanders who had given her the opportunity to prove herself. Meanwhile, Morrison and his team had returned to their families in the United States.
For Morrison, the reunion with his wife Sarah and daughter Emma was bittersweet.
He was grateful to be alive and home, but he could not stop thinking about the woman who had made it possible. Tell me about her, Sarah said one evening as they sat on their back porch watching Emma play in the yard. Morrison had already briefed his wife on the basic facts of the mission, but he had not talked much about his feelings regarding Maria's actions.
She is about the bravest person I have ever met.
And I think she saved us without really thinking about the cost to herself.
Sarah was quiet for a moment. Do you think she has family who are proud of her? Morrison smiled. I hope so. She deserves to have people who understand what she did.
6 months later, Morrison found himself at the Pentagon attending a special ceremony. Maria was being awarded the Silver Star for her actions in Afghanistan, and Morrison had been invited to attend as a witness to her heroism. The ceremony was small and dignified, attended by senior military officials and a few family members. Maria looked uncomfortable in her dress uniform, clearly wishing she could be anywhere else. When the citation was read aloud, Morrison was struck by how inadequate the formal language seemed to describe what had actually happened that day in the mountains. The words on paper could not capture the life and death decisions, the courage under fire, or the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. After the ceremony, Morrison approached Maria and her family. Her parents, both clearly proud but overwhelmed by the attention, thanked him for speaking up about their daughter's actions. Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, Morrison said, I want you to know that Maria saved the lives of 6 fathers, husbands, and sons.
My daughter Emma has her dad home because of what your daughter did.
Maria's mother began to cry, and Maria looked embarrassed by the emotion of the moment. But Morrison was not finished. I also want you to know that what Maria did that day changed me as a person and as a leader. She showed me what real courage looks like, and I will carry that lesson for the rest of my life. Later, as the ceremony attendees were leaving, Morrison and Maria found themselves alone for a few minutes.
How are you adjusting to being back? Morrison asked.
It has been difficult, Maria admitted.
People look at me differently now.
Some see me as a hero, others see me as a symbol, and some just see me as a curiosity. I wish I could go back to being just another soldier.
Morrison nodded, understanding. Fame is not easy for people like us. We joined the military to serve, not to be celebrities. Do you ever regret what happened that day? Maria asked. Morrison was surprised by the question. Regret? How could I regret being alive? How could I regret my team making it home safely? I mean, do you ever regret that it had to happen that way? That someone had to almost die for you to live? Morrison thought carefully before answering. I regret that you were put in that situation. I regret that you had to make those choices.
But I do not regret that you made them, because they were the right choices. And I hope that if I ever face a similar situation, I will have the courage to make the same choices you did.
1 year later, Morrison received an email with a simple subject line, New Assignment.
It was from Maria, who had been selected for advanced sniper training and a new assignment with a special operations unit. "I wanted to let you know that I have been given the opportunity to work with some of the best shooters in the army," she wrote. "It turns out that sometimes being famous for the right reasons opens doors instead of closing them. I am still not comfortable with the attention, but I am learning to use it to help other women who want to serve in combat roles." Morrison smiled as he read the email. Maria was doing exactly what he had hoped she would do, using her experience and recognition to make the military better for everyone. He wrote back immediately, "Congratulations on the new assignment. You earned it through skill and courage, not publicity. If you ever need anything, or if there is ever anything my team can do to support your mission, you only need to ask." 3 years after the mountain rescue, Morrison found himself attending another ceremony, this time as Maria received promotion to Sergeant First Class. She had become one of the Army's premier sniper instructors, training both men and women to excel in one of the military's most demanding specialties. In her brief remarks at the promotion ceremony, Maria said something that stuck with Morrison: "I learned something important that day in Afghanistan. Courage is not about being fearless. Courage is about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And sometimes the right thing requires us to risk everything for people we may never meet again." After the ceremony, Morrison and Maria walked together toward the parking area. They had stayed in touch over the years, and Morrison had come to think of her as one of his closest friends, even though they rarely saw each other in person. "Do you think about that day often?" Morrison asked. "Every day," Maria replied honestly. "Not because I regret it, but because it taught me something about who I am and what I am capable of. It showed me that in the right circumstances, ordinary people can do extraordinary things." Morrison nodded. "It showed me the same thing. But I think you were already extraordinary before that day. The mountain just gave you the opportunity to show it." As they reached their cars, Maria turned to Morrison with a serious expression. "Jake, I want you to know that saving your team was the most important thing I have ever done with my life. Everything good that has happened to me since then has been built on that foundation." Morrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Maria, you saved 6 lives that day. But, more than that, you changed 6 lives. Every one of us became a better person because of what you did. That legacy is going to ripple outward for generations." As Morrison drove home that evening, he thought about the chain of events that had begun with a desperate radio call in the Afghan mountains. Maria's split-second decision to help strangers had changed the course of multiple lives and families. His daughter Emma was now 12 years old and considering her own future. She had heard the story of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez many times, and Morrison could see that it had shaped her understanding of what people could accomplish when they served something larger than themselves. Morrison's team members had all been affected by the experience as well. Petty Officer Rodriguez had become a military instructor, passing on lessons about courage and sacrifice to new generations of sailors. Johnson had been promoted to chief and was leading his own teams in challenging missions. Williams, Martinez, and Davis had all gone on to distinguished careers, carrying with them the memory of a day when one person's courage had made all the difference. But perhaps the most important legacy was one that could not be measured in promotions or medals. In a few minutes of desperate action on a remote mountain in Afghanistan, Maria Rodriguez had proven that heroism was not about size, gender, or background. It was about character, training, and the willingness to risk everything for others. Years later, when military historians studied the engagement, they would note the tactical innovations and strategic implications. But, for the people who were there, the lesson was much simpler: when good people face impossible choices, they sometimes find ways to do impossible things. And, on quiet nights, when Morrison tucked his daughter into bed and she asked him to tell her a story about heroes, he would always tell her about the day when 6 words over a radio, "Help us," brought forth a response that changed everything: the steady, calm voice of a soldier saying, "I can help." In the end, that was what heroism really looked like. Not dramatic speeches or grand gestures, but simple words followed by extraordinary actions. Help was needed, and help was given, regardless of the cost. The mountain had tested them all that day, but it had also revealed something beautiful about human nature: that in our darkest moments, there are still people willing to step forward and say, "I will not let you face this alone." Maria Rodriguez had been one of those people. And, because of her courage, 6 families had been made whole, countless students had learned from an inspiring example, and the world had been reminded that heroes still walked among us, often in the most unexpected places. The story that began with a cry for help in the Afghan mountains had become a testament to the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when duty calls and courage answers.